She didn't flinch when the tourist laughed. It was the kind of laugh that didn't belong here. Too loud, too careless, too sure of itself. The sound cut across the checkpoint like broken glass scraping metal, and yet she stayed still. He was close to the barrier, close enough that one more step would bring a shadow over the line he didn't even know existed. His phone hovered in his hand, tilted just so, catching her face in the frame like she was part of his amusement. But she didn't move. Why? Because movement gives power to the wrong thing. She had learned that lesson the hard way, long before she wore this uniform, long before her hair was tucked under the cap, and her body wrapped in desert camouflage. She had learned it in classrooms where whispers followed her, in barracks where silence weighed more than any word, in missions where the first reaction was the last mistake. Reaction is protocol's enemy. The sun pressed down, merciless and heavy, baking the road until it shimmered like liquid. The air clung to her lungs, thick, metallic, vibrating with the hum of engines in the distance. Boots scuffed faintly on gravel. A drop of sweat traced the curve of her cheekbone, but she didn't raise a hand to wipe it. Stillness, that was her weapon. The mocking man thought he was winning. His friends laughed behind him, recording, whispering words meant to sting. Soldiers at her side stiffened, but she was the only one who looked like stone. Because silence doesn't bend. But inside was another story. She felt the memory rise, the one she never welcomed but never silenced. A road, a convoy, an explosion that turned the world inside out. The sound, it wasn't even sound. It was a void. The way the blast stole the air first, then the noise, then every sense of what was real. She had been there. She had felt metal bite her skin. She had seen the fire eat the vehicle in front of her. She had heard the silence afterward, the silence that screamed louder than anything else. And she had buried people because of it. That was why she stood here, why she had volunteered for this posting when others rolled their eyes, called it a thankless assignment. Because to her, it wasn't about guarding a line in the sand. It was about making sure no one, not ever again, underestimated the cost of crossing it. The tourist laughed louder. Her heart beat steady. 1-2, 1-2, not racing, not panicked, trained, conditioned. But the words cut sharper than the laugh. He muttered something, not for the crowd but for her, words about weakness, about women wearing uniforms they didn't deserve. Her fingers twitched where they rested against her vest, only for a breath, then still again. She could feel the soldier to her right tense. She knew his story. He carried folded paper drawings from his daughter in his vest pocket, always close to his chest like armor. He had told her once, in a quiet moment over coffee, that her stick figures were the reason he didn't flinch anymore. He wanted her to draw him as a hero, even if he wasn't sure he was one. She carried no drawings, no little faces waiting back home. She carried ghosts instead. And that was enough. The mocking man leaned closer. His shadow threatened the barrier. His phone caught the glare of the sun. For one breath, for one dangerous instant, his toe hovered over the line. The crowd hushed, laughter stuttering into silence. Would he? Could he? The soldier beside her swallowed hard. Another shifted his grip on the sling of his weapon. But she didn't move. Her silence weighed heavier than their tension. Her eyes fixed forward, not on him, not on the phone, but on the invisible line that defined everything they were there for. He didn't understand that silence could be a wall. Not yet. The radio crackled, sharp, brief, a single call sign spoken. She heard it, he didn't. Her authority moved. Not in a dramatic gesture, not in some cinematic flourish, just a shift, a ripple through the line, a tiny re-angling of weapons, a barrier nudged. Enough. And in that breath, the mocking man stopped. His laugh faltered. His phone lowered a fraction. His smile slipped into something else. His eyes flicked to hers, and for the first time he saw it. Not rage, not violence. Control. The kind of control that doesn't need to shout to be heard. The kind that doesn't move until it must, and when it does, there's no mistaking it. The crowd broke apart. The friends who had egged him on pulled back, muttering excuses, shoving hands into pockets. The man stood alone, the weight of silence pressing on him harder than any command. And then he turned, he walked away, phone down, shoulders tight. The checkpoint exhaled. Engines hummed in the distance. The radio quieted. Soldiers settled back into their stillness, though it wasn't the same stillness as before. It was heavier now, more certain. She breathed slow, steady. Her fingers flexed once, loosening the tension in her gloves. The leather creaked. A breeze cut across the desert, carrying sand against her boots. No words were spoken, none needed to be. But inside, her silence cracked. Not outwardly, not visibly, but in the private corners of her memory, because moments like this were never just moments. They were reminders. They were echoes of promises whispered over flag-draped coffins. Never again. Her chest tightened, not with pride, not with triumph, with something far older, far heavier. Because she knew what the tourist didn't. She knew that silence doesn't heal, silence carries, silence holds what words can't. And it never puts it down. The mocking man would forget. He would tell a story later, maybe twist it into something about intimidation or humor, something that painted him as daring. But she would carry the faces of people who never came home. She would carry the moment of explosion, the ringing silence that had carved itself into her bones. That was why she stood still when he laughed. That was why she didn't flinch when he spoke, because her silence wasn't about him. It was about them. The people gone, the people remembered, the people she refused to dishonor by breaking. A gust of wind tugged at the flag above the post. The fabric snapped once, sharp against the still air. She blinked slowly, the heat pressing into her eyelids. Somewhere far off, beyond this desert, beyond this checkpoint, another mission waited. Another silence she would have to hold. But not yet. Not here. Here she simply stood, a shadow in the sun, a voice unspeaking. And the silence, her silence, continued. Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The screen glowed with satellite images, red lines drawn across shifting terrain, a blur of grids and numbers. The commander's voice cut through the dim-lit room, steady and clipped, but none of it was aimed at her. Men leaned in, exchanged nods, muttered questions, as though her seat at the far end of the table didn't exist. It wasn't new, it wasn't surprising, but it still pressed into her chest like a weight. She listened anyway, every word, every gesture. The way his finger lingered over one sector longer than the others. The way the intelligence officer avoided his eyes when fuel depots were mentioned. Details that slipped past the one speaking the loudest. They didn't ask her opinion. They didn't even glance at her. And that was fine. Because when the silence broke, when the mission was live, they would remember her in the only way that mattered, by what she did. Her call sign wasn't spoken often. It didn't need to be. She wasn't the type to draw attention in a room. She was the one you didn't notice until she was already where she needed to be. And tonight she would be there. The mission was simple on paper. A convoy route, supply protection, a show of presence in a contested corridor where tensions snapped like wires stretched too tight. But she knew better than to believe in simple. There's no such thing. The desert doesn't care about paper. The desert rewrites everything. Her hand brushed over the folded photo tucked inside her vest. Not her family, not anymore. It was a squad photo. Faces half smiling, half serious, caught in the kind of picture you never think will matter until it's all you have left. She ran her thumb over one face in particular. He had been her partner once. He had taught her how to breathe through a sniper scope, how to time a shot between heartbeats. He had been laughing when the blast came. And then he was gone. That's what silence meant for her now. It wasn't absence, it was memory. The commander wrapped up, Orders dispersed. The others rose, chairs scraping, chatter breaking out, jokes, complaints, casual bravado. She stood too, but quietly, slipping into the stream without adding a sound. No one noticed her leave. That was fine. Outside, the night pressed heavy and alive. The desert had its own voice after dark, a low hum of insects, the shuffle of boots on dirt, the thrum of distant engines. She walked toward the hangar where her team gathered, shadows cut by the harsh glow of floodlights. One of them, Ray, spotted her. He gave a crooked grin, shaking his head. "You don't say much, do you?" She didn't answer, just checked her rifle, smooth and mechanical, fingers sliding across the familiar weight. Ray's chuckled softly. Fair enough. He was the kind of soldier who filled silence with stories. Everyone knew he talked too much, but that was how he fought nerves. He told her once, in a rare quiet moment, that he hated silence because silence reminded him of the first time he froze in combat. He had seen a boy holding something, didn't know if it was a weapon or not, and the hesitation cost lives. Since then, he filled every gap with words so his thoughts wouldn't catch him off guard. She understood in her own way. The convoy moved at 200. Engines low, lights blacked out, dust rising in pale plumes behind armored tires. She sat in the second vehicle, rifle angled across her lap, helmet pressing tight against her skull. Her eyes scanned the horizon, trained to see movement where none should be. The desert was vast, but danger was always close. She felt it in her bones before she saw it. A shift, a shadow, a shape that didn't belong. Her breath slowed. 1-2, 1-2. She raised her hand, not a word spoken, just a signal. The convoy halted. Engines growled into silence. Radios hissed. Soldiers leaned, peered, whispered questions. She stepped down, boots crunching, dust rising. The night was a blanket of heat and tension. The air seemed to thicken as she moved ahead, scanning the rocks, the dips in the earth. Her rifle lifted, her scope finding lines others missed. And there, half buried, almost invisible, a coil of wire glinted under the moonlight. Her throat tightened. She didn't shout, didn't curse, didn't break posture. She simply raised 2 fingers, a signal every soldier behind her knew. IED. The silence that followed was suffocating. Ray's muttered a low curse, more breath than word. The driver exhaled, long and shaky. Someone behind them whispered a prayer in their native tongue. She stayed locked in, calm still. Because that's what they needed, not panic, not fear, silence. The bomb tech moved forward, careful, measured. Sweat poured down his face despite the coolness of the night. She kept her rifle trained on the darkness, eyes cutting across ridges, knowing whoever placed that device might still be watching. Her heart beat steady. 1-2, 1-2. She thought of him again, her partner, laughing before the blast. She thought of the sound that wasn't sound, the silence that took everything. Her jaw tightened. Not this time. The tech finished. The wire was cut, the device neutralized, the signal given. The convoy exhaled again, engines roaring back to life. Soldiers shifted, glances exchanged, relief pouring through the cracks. But she stayed silent, still. Because inside something else churned. Not fear, not relief. Memory. Always memory. Ray's leaned toward her once they were moving again, his voice low enough only she could hear. "You saved us back there." She didn't answer, just adjusted her rifle, eyes on the horizon. But he wasn't finished. "You ever think," he said, "that maybe silence is louder than anything else? Like, when you didn't move, none of us moved either. We just followed you." Her chest ached, not from his words, from the truth in them. Because silence does lead, silence does shape. But silence also breaks. She thought of the tourist again, the mocking laugh, the lowered phone, the way silence had crushed him harder than words ever could. And she wondered, did he understand? Or did he walk away thinking it was nothing? She would never know. The convoy rolled on, headlights cutting faint beams across the endless sand. The night stretched, long and unbroken. She held her silence, her stillness, her promise. But deep inside, in a place no one else could see, she asked herself the question that never left. How long can silence carry before it breaks? The desert didn't answer. It never does. What made her break the silence that night? The convoy had returned, dust-caked and tired, every man and woman carrying the weight of what might have been. They parked the vehicles inside the compound, engines shutting down one by one, until the desert night pressed in like a heavy blanket. Soldiers stretched, muttered, wiped sweat from their brows. She sat for a moment longer, hands still on her rifle, watching the dust swirl through beams of pale light. The others filed out. Ray's clapped her on the shoulder as he passed, murmuring, "Another one down." His grin was tired but real. She didn't smile back, because she had seen something the others hadn't. It was brief, a figure dark and distant, slipping behind a ridge just before the bomb tech cut the wire, too far for a shot, too uncertain for a call, but close enough that she knew someone had been there. Someone had been watching them dance on the edge of death. And that someone wasn't finished. The barracks hummed with low voices. Coffee boiled in tin kettles. Radios hissed in static-filled bursts. She walked past it all, silent as always, until she reached her cot. She sat down, unfastening straps, peeling gloves from sweat-sticky fingers. But she couldn't rest. The image replayed again and again, a shadow on a ridge, a presence, a warning. She closed her eyes. And she was back there again on that road. The convoy, the laughter of her partner, the blast. Her chest clenched. She opened her eyes, pushing the memory down like she had done 1,000 times. Not now, not here. Sleep didn't come easy. When it did, it wasn't rest. It was a battlefield of its own. She woke before dawn, boots on the ground before most others stirred. The desert was gray in the early light, the horizon stretching endless and empty. Except it wasn't empty, not to her. She could still feel eyes on her. By the time the next briefing came, her mind was already turning over possibilities. Patterns, tactics. They wouldn't plant one device and disappear. This was a test, a probe. They were studying the convoy as much as the convoy studied the terrain. She sat at the table again, same seat, same silence. The commander outlined new patrols, shifting routes, and increased pace of operations. The others nodded, chimed in, filled the air with voices. She listened, absorbed, noticed what wasn't said. But then, against her nature, she spoke. "North Ridge." The room paused. Heads turned, startled that she had broken her silence. The commander frowned slightly. "What about it?" Her voice was calm, low, steady. "That's where they were watching. The IED wasn't meant to destroy us. It was meant to measure us. They'll be back." The table was quiet. A few skeptical looks passed between men who had long since decided what she was worth. But one, Ray's, leaned forward. "She's right," he said. "It felt wrong, too easy." The commander studied her for a long beat. His eyes searched her face, weighing, calculating. Then he nodded once. "We'll put eyes on the ridge tonight." And just like that, the silence broke. Not because she wanted it to, because it had to. That night she was on the ridge. The wind was colder there, biting through layers of fabric, carrying the smell of dust and fuel. She lay prone, scope pressed against her eye, breath slowed into the rhythm she had learned years ago. The world narrowed to a circle of glass. Her spotter this time wasn't Ray's. It was a younger soldier, Patel, barely 2 tours behind him, nervous energy rolling off him in waves. He whispered too much, shifted too often, but he meant well. He had told her earlier about his fiancée back home, about the wedding they were planning if he made it back. She hadn't answered him then. She rarely answered, but she remembered. She always remembered. Through the scope the desert stretched endless. Shadows shifted. Heat rose in faint waves even under the stars. And then movement. Two figures, slipping low, careful, too careful for shepherds. Her finger brushed the trigger guard. Patel tensed beside her. Do we? Not yet, she murmured. Her breath steadied. The figures moved closer, crouching near the path the convoy would take at dawn. She saw hands working, digging, placing. Her chest tightened. Memory screamed. The road, the blast, the silence afterward. Her partner's laughter cut short. Her finger curled, breath pausing, the weight of the shot pressing heavy. But something stopped her. The figures weren't rushing. They weren't desperate. They were deliberate, measured, which meant this wasn't the main strike. This was bait. She exhaled slow. Not these, she whispered. There are more. Patel glanced at her, uncertain. How can you? But then movement on the far ridge. Another figure, then another, watching, waiting. She was right. She always hated being right. Patel's breath caught. There's too many. Stay still, she said softly. Her scope drifted. Crosshairs traced one of the watchers, a silhouette against the faint starlight. Calm, patient. Just like her. Her heart hammered once hard, because she knew this wasn't just an ambush. This was a conversation, a test between hunters. And silence was their language. Hours crawled, the figures worked, planted, faded back into the dark. The watchers disappeared like smoke. Patel shifted, whispering, "We should have taken the shot." She didn't answer. Because the truth was heavier than words. If she had taken the shot, it would have started something none of them were ready for. It would have shattered the fragile silence between them and the shadows. Sometimes restraint was survival. At dawn, the bomb squad moved in. Devices were found, neutralized, reports filed. Soldiers patted each other on the back. Another victory claimed. But she didn't feel victory. She felt the weight of eyes on her. Somewhere out there, beyond the horizon, someone was watching her just as she had watched them. And she knew this wasn't over. Back at the compound, Reyes found her sitting alone, rifle across her knees. He lowered himself beside her, handing her a tin cup of coffee. You ever get tired of being right? She didn't smile, just stared into the rising steam. Thought so, he muttered, sipping his own. He was quiet for a while, which was rare for him. Then he said, "You carry it different, you know, the silence. It's not just for you." She glanced at him just once. He met her eyes, no grin this time. It's for all of us, we follow it, even when we don't understand it. Her throat tightened, she looked away. Because if he knew what her silence really carried, the ghosts, the promises, the unhealed wounds, he might not have said that. Or maybe he would have. The day burned on, heat pressed down, orders shifted, patrols resumed. And she returned to her post, motionless under the sun, eyes scanning, heart steady. But inside she felt it. The silence was thinning. And she wondered how long before it broke. She didn't feel the rain at first. Only the cold weight of it sliding down the back of her neck, soaking into the collar of her fatigues, settling there like an unwelcome reminder that nature never asked permission. Around her, the small forward post stirred with muted voices, half-whispers in the downpour. The guard tower's shadow loomed above her, and beyond its silhouette the gray horizon stretched forever, the world blurred by sheets of water. But what caught her attention wasn't the storm, it was the laughter. It didn't belong. Out here, laughter carried too much weight. It wasn't the kind of laughter that relieved tension or stitched together fractured nerves. No, this laughter was sharp, mocking, out of place. And when she turned, she saw the source, the tourist. The man had been escorted here hours earlier after straying too close to the perimeter. Foreign, casual, camera still swinging from his neck like this was some exhibition. His words had been dismissive, barbed with ridicule, as though every step the guards took, every silent gesture they exchanged, was theater put on for his amusement. And now, even with warning still hanging in the damp air, he chuckled like a child at a circus. She said nothing, but her silence was not weakness. Inside, she wrestled with the same conflict that had haunted her since her first deployment, when to speak, and when to let discipline carve its own message. She had learned early that authority wasn't in raised voices or swinging rifles. It lived in the pauses, in the look that told someone you'd seen things they hadn't and survived them. Still, the laughter bit deep. It scraped at old scars, memories she kept hidden. She thought of her brother, his photograph tucked inside her pack. He'd laughed once too. Loud, carefree, unafraid of the world. But war had no humor. When the call came home, there was no punchline, only silence, the kind that made her mother fold into herself, breaking in ways words couldn't fix. That was why she served. Why she stood here now, boots sinking into the mud, ignoring the chill in her bones. The tourist didn't know, couldn't know. But ignorance didn't excuse disrespect. And in the culture of the Guard, where discipline was stitched tighter than skin, mocking protocol was dangerous. A fellow soldier, Corporal Hayes, passed her shoulder with a mutter. "You gonna let him keep yappin'? Or do I have to?" His tone carried more weariness than anger, but his jaw flexed with restraint. She gave the smallest shake of her head. Not yet. Because there was something Hayes hadn't seen. A twitch in the tourist's eyes between laughs, a flicker of nervousness too quick for most to catch. This wasn't just arrogance. It was cover. And she'd learned to distrust anyone who performed too loudly in places where silence was survival. So she watched, patient, listening between the spaces of his mockery. The rain grew heavier. The Guard rotation shifted. Beyond the wire, the earth swallowed sound, leaving only the drone of water and the occasional groan of metal in the wind. Inside the small shelter, she leaned against the wall, helmet low, eyes half closed as though she was resting. But her senses were sharp, counting breaths, mapping patterns. The tourist sat near the heat lamp, hands out, joking again about soldiers guarding mud and shadows. One of the younger privates, barely 20, flushed red and gripped his rifle tighter. She caught it instantly, the trigger of insecurity being pulled. She moved before he could snap. "Walk with me." Her voice was calm, directed at the private. No explanation, no room for protest. The boy followed, confused but obedient, and when they stepped out into the rain again, she let the silence hold before speaking. "You don't hand him your anger," she said quietly. "That's what he's looking for. Make him fight shadows, not you." The private nodded, shame washing over his expression. And in that moment she remembered being in his place, years ago, when her own temper almost cost her control during a checkpoint. It had been her mentor then, a captain with eyes like carved stone who pulled her aside, telling her discipline wasn't chains. It was a weapon. Now she found herself repeating those words, passing them forward, like a torch that had burned her hands but lit her path. Hours blurred. The storm refused to leave, painting the horizon darker, heavier. The tourist's laughter grew thinner, forced, as if even he was tiring of the act. And yet he lingered. He hadn't asked to leave, hadn't shown signs of wanting extraction. That unsettled her. Why stay in a place he mocked? The answer circled in her mind like a vulture. And then, late into the night, when the post was quieter, she saw it, a shift in his demeanor when he thought no one was watching. His posture stiffened, eyes darting to the Guard rotation schedule pinned on the wall. He wasn't just a fool. He was studying. Her stomach tightened. When she reported it to her superior, she chose her words carefully. "Something off. He's watching us, not mocking us. The laugh is a mask." Her superior frowned, unconvinced. "He's a nuisance, not a threat. Don't invent shadows, Sergeant." But she couldn't shake it. Shadows had teeth. She learned that the hard way when a routine patrol turned into an ambush years ago, because someone dismissed her instinct. She still remembered the sound of boots hitting mud, the scream of metal tearing into the night, and the faces that never returned. So this time, she trusted her gut. She kept her eyes on the tourist even when protocol told her to relax. And when dawn finally broke, a pale, washed-out light spilling over the drenched outpost, she saw what she'd been waiting for. The tourist reached into his jacket, fingers brushing a seam too deliberately. Not fumbling, not casual. Intentional. Her voice cut through the morning like a blade. Hands where I can see them. The camp froze. For a moment he tried to laugh again. A hollow, forced chuckle. But it cracked this time, fractured under the weight of eyes trained on him, rifles shifting in unison. And that was when the truth slipped out. He wasn't carrying a camera for memories. He wasn't here for amusement. The device tucked in his coat wasn't harmless. It was something else entirely. But she didn't move closer yet. Didn't give him the satisfaction of her fear. Instead, she held his gaze, calm and unwavering, as the rain eased into silence around them. Because discipline wasn't about who shouted loudest. It was about who could wait the longest before the storm broke. What gave him away wasn't the device. Not at first, it was the eyes. She had learned long ago that eyes always betrayed the truth. Fear, intent, deceit, they all flickered there before words or hands could follow, and his eyes weren't mocking anymore. They were calculating, the way a predator studies distance before the strike. The soldiers around her didn't see it yet. They saw a wet, pathetic figure caught in a lie, maybe carrying contraband, maybe nothing. But she saw the tension in his grip, the way his thumb hovered over a pressure point inside his coat. She knew what that meant. And in the space of a breath, her mind was no longer in the outpost. It was in another place, another year. A marketplace. Civilians screaming. Her brother's last message left unread on her phone while she stared down at a child covered in dust and blood, the bomber's device still humming faintly beside the broken bodies. She never forgave herself for arriving late that day. Not again. Don't move. Her voice cut the air, not raised, not frantic, just final. The others shifted their rifles up, safeties flicked off in a chorus of metal clicks. The tourist froze, caught in a cage of barrels and unblinking eyes, but still he smiled. Not mockingly this time, bitter, cold. "What do you think you're guarding?" he asked, his accent sharper now, less careless. "Mud, rusted fences. No, you're guarding nothing, and nothing will bury you." Her jaw tightened. His words were meant to dig, to unsteady. She'd heard versions of them before, from prisoners, from whispers on intercepted comms, always the same: strip away purpose, turn conviction into doubt. But her conviction wasn't theirs to take. What he didn't understand was that she wasn't standing in the rain for fences or mud. She was here for faces: her brother, her mother, the private who almost lost control last night. She guarded the living even when they didn't see it, especially then. The commander stepped closer, raising a hand for caution. "Sergeant, we don't escalate yet. Let him." The man's thumb twitched. She didn't think. Training did. A shout broke the air, orders blending with instinct as she lunged, striking his wrist hard enough to jar the device free. It tumbled into the mud, a small black shape too ordinary to hold such terror. For a second no one moved. Then Hayes kicked it away, boots grinding it deeper into the wet earth while another soldier dragged the man down. Restraints snapped shut. Silence followed, a heavy, waiting silence. And then came the sound, a faint electronic whine from the crushed device. Her chest tightened, clear the area. They scattered. Boots slammed against mud, gear clattered, hearts pounded. She moved last, forcing herself to stay calm, to not sprint, to make her soldiers believe in her steadiness. Behind them, the device let out a final hiss before dying. No blast, no fire, just silence. Relief washed the outpost in uneven waves. Some laughed nervously, others cursed. One of the younger guards sat down in the mud, trembling too hard to stand. But she didn't feel relief, not fully, because the device had been crude, unfinished. A test, not an attack, and tests always meant someone else was watching. That night the rain stopped. The world smelled of wet iron and damp earth. The prisoner sat under guard, silent now, eyes burning holes into the dark. She didn't approach him, not yet. Instead, she walked the perimeter alone, tracing the wire with gloved fingers, listening to the hum of the generator and the quiet breathing of men trying to sleep. Her boots sank into the softened ground and she thought of her brother again. He used to hate storms. Said thunder made him feel small, like the sky was mocking him. She had teased him for it once. She wished she hadn't. Now she understood. The sky wasn't mocking. It was reminding of how little control they had, how fragile the line between silence and catastrophe. Hayes found her later, cigarette glowing faintly between his fingers. He didn't offer her one. He knew she didn't smoke. "You ever wonder why we're the ones still here?" he asked, voice low, roughened by years of dust and shouting. She didn't answer immediately. The truth was heavy, too heavy to throw between them in the quiet. She thought of luck, of choices, of punishment that felt like survival. Finally, she said, "Because someone has to be." Hayes nodded, exhaling a cloud that drifted up toward the faint stars. "Yeah, someone has to be." They stood together in silence, the kind that wasn't empty but shared. And beneath it, her mind returned again and again to the tourist's eyes, to the bitterness in his smile, to the unfinished hum of the device. There was more coming. She could feel it in her bones. And what haunted her most wasn't the threat outside the wire. It was the question clawing at her from within. Would she be enough this time? The doubt slipped in quietly, the way shadows did when the lantern burned low. But she didn't push it away. She let it stay, heavy in her chest, because she knew doubt was what kept her sharp. The ones who thought they were invincible didn't last long. When she finally lay down to rest, her pack became her pillow, her brother's photo pressing against her temple. She closed her eyes, hearing again the faint whine of the device, seeing again the marketplace years ago. And she promised him, as if he were still listening, "I won't be late again." The morning light came weak and uncertain, like it too was hesitant to cross into this place. She stood at the edge of the wire, helmet under her arm. The horizon stretched wide before her, flat, open ground glistening from last night's rain. It should have been calming, but the quiet pressed too hard. Quiet was never just quiet. She scanned the earth the way others read books, tracing shifts in mud, the unnatural line of crushed grass, the faint indentation where someone had waited too long in one place. Nothing fresh today, nothing obvious, but her instincts screamed otherwise. Something lingered. Behind her, the outpost hummed with uneasy life. The prisoner, the mocking tourist turned would-be saboteur, sat chained near the tower, guarded by two armed soldiers. His arrogance had curdled into silence. Not fear, not remorse, just silence. The kind that carried weight, as though he could afford to wait for something they couldn't see. She hated that silence. Hayes approached, the usual slump in his shoulders, coffee steaming in a battered tin mug. He offered it out. She shook her head. Her stomach couldn't hold warmth today. "You're wound tight," he said, taking a sip. "Tighter than usual." "He's not done," she replied. Hayes frowned, following her gaze to the prisoner. "Then let him stew. Intel team will take him in a day or two." A day or two, too long. She didn't say it aloud. She just shifted her helmet under her arm, jaw clenched. Because there was something she hadn't told Hayes, or anyone. Something that had clawed into her dreams the moment the device whined itself dead. The design had been crude, yes, but familiar. She'd seen blueprints like it before, years back during training sessions on captured enemy equipment. And those designs weren't just random. They belonged to a cell rumored to operate far beyond this region. Her brother's unit had been hit by them. The file never confirmed it, but she remembered the report, fragments of an unfinished device, same signature, same ugly hum. And now one of their pawns sat chained a few yards away, mocking rain-soaked soldiers like it was a play. Coincidence? No. Her pulse thudded hard in her ears. The quiet pressed again. That night the quiet broke. It began with a distant thump, soft, almost disguised by wind, then another, closer. By the third, everyone in the outpost was on their feet, mortar fire. Positions. The world snapped alive. Boots struck wood and mud. Rifles snapped to shoulders. The tower's spotlight carved through the night as the first round landed just outside the wire, spraying earth in a rain of dirt and stone. The prisoner smiled through it all, his face lit by the flash. She didn't flinch. She couldn't. Her body moved on instinct, grabbing the nearest private by the vest and shoving him behind cover as another round screamed down. The air split with thunder. Shrapnel sliced the dark. "Return fire," Hayes barked, his voice steady even as chaos erupted. The guards fired into the tree line, bursts of light carving arcs against blackness. No clear targets, just shadows. Her eyes didn't leave the prisoner. Because even as earth shook and men shouted, his calm never broke. He wasn't just surviving the chaos, he was anticipating it. And in that moment she knew he hadn't come to mock. He had come to time them, to mark their rotations, to test their response. This attack wasn't the strike, it was another rehearsal. Her chest burned with the realization. The bombardment slowed, 3 more rounds thudding before the night drew still again. Silence returned, thick and suffocating. Soldiers panted in the shadows, some wide-eyed, others steady but rattled. One bled from a shallow cut across his cheek. The private she'd shoved stared at her with shaky gratitude. But her eyes were locked on the horizon. The quiet mocked them now. Hayes stepped up beside her, breathing hard. "Scare tactics," he muttered. "Light barrage, they'll back off." She shook her head. "No, they'll be back." He wanted to argue. She saw it in the twitch of his mouth, but something in her tone stopped him. Later, when the outpost settled back into uneasy watch, she walked alone again, this time carrying the weight of certainty. They weren't defending mud and wire anymore. They were sitting on the edge of something bigger. She thought of her brother, of how his last message, "Be safe, I'll see you soon," had arrived hours before his convoy disappeared. She had replayed it countless times, memorized every pause, every word, every silence in between. Now she wondered if someone had once watched him too, mocked him, tested him. The thought clawed at her chest until her breath came ragged. She pressed her palms against the cold wire fence, eyes closed. The metal hummed faintly, alive with the night wind. A choice formed in her mind. She couldn't wait for orders, couldn't trust command to connect dots they didn't want to see. If this was truly the same network, then she had more than duty pulling her forward. She had blood. The prisoner shifted on his chair under guard, chains clinking. His silence was louder than the storm. She opened her eyes and whispered to herself, low enough that no one else could hear. "This isn't over." The prisoner's silence grew heavier with each hour, pressing down on the outpost like an invisible hand. The others thought it was a victory, that stripping him of his voice meant they had broken him. But she knew better. Silence wasn't surrender. It was calculation. That thought haunted her as she sat by the dim light of a lantern, maps spread before her, rain dripping from her sleeves. Hayes snored quietly in the corner, his exhaustion laid bare. The younger private shifted restlessly in his bunk, muttering fragments of dreams. The world outside was still, but her mind was racing. Every detail of the mortar barrage replayed itself. The timing between rounds, the spread, the way the fire ceased abruptly after the 8th shot, too controlled, too intentional, not an attack, a rehearsal. Her hand trembled as she marked the arcs on the map. It wasn't just training fire. It was calibration. Someone out there was measuring distance, recording response time, mapping their defenses through every flash and movement. And the prisoner, he had orchestrated it with a smile. She stared at him through the half-open flap of the guard tent. He sat with his hands bound, back straight, eyes sharp even in the shadows, not broken, not afraid, just waiting. Her stomach twisted. What she hadn't told anyone yet, not Hayes, not command, was what she'd recognized in the crude device. It wasn't just any bomb-making attempt. It was a signature. The same signature tied to the convoy attack that had killed her brother. She swallowed hard. The memory rose again, unbidden. Her mother's trembling hands clutching the phone, her own numbness as she stared at the official report, the unanswered questions. Why him? Why that day? The file had been cold, clinical, written in language that stripped her brother of his humanity. But now, staring at this prisoner, she felt the edges of an answer cutting into her. This wasn't random, this was connected. She leaned back, closing her eyes, listening to the rain. And in the silence, a question surfaced. What would she do if this man carried the thread that tied her to her brother's killers? The answer frightened her. By morning, Hayes noticed the dark circles under her eyes. He tried to lighten the mood with his usual dry humor. "Careful, Sergeant. You'll end up looking like me if you keep skipping sleep." She managed the smallest smile. It didn't reach her eyes. "You mean carrying the whole post's cynicism in your bones?" "Exactly that." He chuckled, but it faded quickly. His gaze followed hers to the prisoner. "Still think he's more than a clown with a failed toy?" She didn't answer right away. The silence stretched. Then finally she said, "I think he's the opening act." The words landed heavy. Hayes didn't laugh this time. Later, during the midday rotation, she walked the perimeter again. The mud sucked at her boots, the air heavy with damp earth and diesel. Each step felt like a countdown. She couldn't shake the sense that something larger was moving beneath the surface, a current pulling them toward a collision. At the far corner of the wire, the young private from before stood watch, rifle slung too loose, eyes distant. She stopped beside him. "Hard night?" she asked. He startled slightly. "Yes, Sergeant, I couldn't sleep, kept hearing the blasts." She nodded. She remembered being his age, trying to steady her hands after her first attack. "You're not weak for that," she said softly. "You're alive. Alive means you still get to feel it." He swallowed hard, nodding, but his jaw tightened like he didn't believe it. She wanted to tell him more about her own nightmares, about the marketplace, about the photo she carried of her brother, but she kept it inside. Some burdens were too raw to hand off. Still, she hoped her words would hold him steady when the next barrage came. Because it would. That evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, a convoy finally arrived from command. Not to extract the prisoner, not yet, just to resupply. The soldiers unloaded crates of ammunition, fuel, rations. Routine, ordinary, too ordinary. But as she watched them, something in her chest tightened. She scanned every face, every gesture, looking for the flicker of insincerity. Because if the enemy had tested them once, why wouldn't they test infiltration next? Her hand hovered near her rifle the entire time. When the convoy departed, leaving dust and silence in its wake, Hayes caught her arm. "You're spiraling," he said quietly. "You're seeing ghosts in every shadow." "Ghosts don't fire mortars," she snapped, sharper than she meant. His eyes softened, but he didn't push further. That night she sat alone in the tower, staring out across the darkened fields. The prisoner's presence gnawed at her from below. She traced her brother's photo with gloved fingers, lips pressed tight. And for the first time since he died, she whispered aloud to the silence, "I think I found them." The words broke something open inside her. Not hope, not yet, but a purpose sharpened into something dangerous. Because if she was right, this wasn't just about defending an outpost. This was about finishing what had stolen her brother. And when the next test came, she would be ready. But the question lingered, a shadow in the quiet. What line would she cross when the moment arrived? The answer waited in the dark, coiled and silent. The storm didn't announce itself this time. No distant thump, no warning whistle in the air. It came all at once, a wall of fire and steel. The first mortar struck the edge of the compound and blew apart the ground like it was paper. The shockwave slammed through the barracks, rattling her teeth, throwing men from their bunks. Before anyone could shout, the second landed inside the wire. Screams followed, real this time. She was already moving. Boots sliding on mud, hands steady on her rifle, voice cutting through chaos. Cover, get to cover. But this wasn't like the night before. This wasn't calibration. This was a strike. Rounds hammered the perimeter, one after another, faster, closer. Dirt rained. The night split open with fire. The prisoner, still chained to his chair, lifted his face to the sky, eyes glowing in the light of the blasts. And then he laughed. She froze mid-step, not from fear but recognition. The sound was the same as before, but stripped of its mockery. This was triumph. Her gut turned cold. This wasn't just an attack. He had signaled it. Somehow. The mortar team had been waiting for his cue, and now they rained destruction with surgical precision. Hayes appeared through smoke, dragging a wounded private, blood streaking the boy's arm. His voice cracked from shouting. "We need comms up now." But she wasn't listening fully. Her focus locked on the prisoner, on his smile, and in that split second she made a choice. She crossed the yard under fire. Bullets stitched the mud, mortars ripped the night, shouts filled her ears, but her vision tunneled. She reached him, yanked the chair over, and pressed her rifle to his chest. "What's the signal?" she demanded. His smile widened. Too late. Her finger tightened on the trigger. Rage burned hot, but something inside held her back, not mercy, not hesitation, something colder. She couldn't shoot him, not yet. Dead men gave no answers. She dragged him upright, chains clinking, forcing him toward the bunker. "Move." Another blast tore through the tower, spraying sparks and wood across the compound. Men dove for cover. The air tasted of burning diesel and blood. Inside the bunker, she shoved him against the wall. Hayes stumbled in behind her, cursing, pressing a bandage to the private's wound. "They're walking the fire in closer. We won't hold." The prisoner chuckled, blood at his lip. "You won't walk out alive." Something in her snapped. She slammed him against the wall, fist tightening around his collar. "Who are you talking to? Who's out there?" His only reply was silence, the same silence that had mocked them for days. But silence wasn't empty, it was message. Her mind raced. If the mortars were calibrated last night, then tonight was execution. That meant they weren't just firing blind. Someone outside the wire had eyes. Maybe a spotter, maybe a drone, maybe both. She let go of him, breath ragged, looked at Hayes. "We end it now, before they walk another round into the heart." Hayes hesitated, exhaustion in his face. "How?" Her answer was already forming. Risky, desperate, but it was the only way. "We find their spotter." The look he gave her was almost disbelief. But he nodded, because out here, doubt killed quicker than bullets. Minutes later, she crawled through mud beyond the wire, rain slicking her face, rifle pressed to her chest. Every instinct screamed to stay low, to stay hidden. But her brother's face burned in her mind. Not this time. She wouldn't be too late this time. The ground trembled with each distant launch. She counted seconds between whistles, traced arcs, plotted lines. And then she saw it, a faint glint on the ridge, a lens catching firelight. Her pulse steadied. She slowed her breath, lined up the shot, fingers cold but sure. Her scope framed the silhouette, a man lying prone, radio pressed to his ear, hand gesturing toward the outpost. The spotter. She squeezed. The crack cut through the night. The figure jerked, slumped. Silence followed, brief but telling. The mortar fire staggered, then faltered, then stopped. She exhaled, chest heaving, mud caked to her skin. The silence after the barrage was thicker than any noise. Not peace, just aftermath. She returned to the compound hours later, body shaking with exhaustion. Soldiers moved like ghosts in the dim light, tending to the wounded, shoveling earth over craters. Hayes sat slumped against a wall, smoke curling from his cigarette, eyes hollow. The prisoner was still alive, chained in the bunker, but his smile had died with the spotter. Now his silence was empty, not calculating. She walked past him without a word. She didn't need answers anymore, not from him. Outside, dawn cracked the horizon, painting the broken compound gold. She stood there, mud soaking her boots, breath visible in the cool air. She reached into her pack, pulled out her brother's photo, and held it against the light. For the first time, the image didn't crush her. It steadied her. She whispered, "I wasn't late this time." Around her, the outpost stirred with weary life. Soldiers laughed weakly, cursed softly, breathed like men who'd borrowed another day. And in their survival, she found her own answer. Because dignity didn't always roar. It didn't need to announce itself with triumph or speeches. Sometimes, dignity was a silent figure in the mud, steady hands on a rifle, choosing to act when no one else could. She slipped the photo back into her pack and let the silence settle. Not empty, not mocking, just full. And when she finally walked away from the wire, boots pressing into broken earth, the moral carried itself like the weight of her rifle. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.